Hi, everyone. Happy Sunday to all of you. Can you hear me, Karen? My
Yes,
voice is echoing for some reason.
I can hear you.
Okay, there's no echo, right?
No.
All right. So, welcome, everyone. Happy Sunday. Today is day 5 of our Reclaim to Power. And we have with us the very beautiful, lovely, strong, powerful activist, Karen. Karen Craggs-Milne. Uh, what I would like to share about Karen is that I met her at Landmark Education, and um, she stood up to share part of her story, and I was full of admiration for her guts to be authentic. Karen is originally from Kenya. She was an Obama White House recognized gender equality change maker in June 2016 and a Canadian Global Goodwill Ambassador January 2018. Karen is known as the leading go to expert for anyone seeking to deliver meaningful results on gender, equality, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. With over 20 years of global expertise, Karen has advised and worked with a wide range of actors, in, including the United Nations, private sector companies, NGOs, community agencies, and government agencies in Canada and overseas on how to promote equality meaningfully. Karen launched the Conscious Equality Accelerator program. This online program systematically teaches all the concepts, skills, and tools you need to apply equality consciously in your life and across projects, organizations, governments, and policies. Karen is a global influencer and thought leader with an international network of over 7,000 equality practitioners. Karen has an innate gift for transforming individuals and organizations, engaging and empowering men and marginalized groups in this often tense work. Karen is a powerful speaker, a gifted workshop facilitator, a leading expert, and a passionate advocate for conscious equality. Whatever it is in a rural village or in a boardroom, Karen's passion is contagious and will inspire you into action. Presently, Karen is the head of anti racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion at Thought Exchange. Welcome, Karen, and I am very grateful and honored that you granted us so much time from your busy schedule. I really appreciate your presence here, and I'm looking forward to learning from you a lot of things that perhaps I don't know about gender equality, about inclusion, about equity, about violence against women. So, welcome here.
Thank you so much. I'm always honored to spend any time I can with you and to have this conversation with anyone who's ready to have it. So thank you.
Karen, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about yourself, something that we don't know.
Well, okay. So I think it's important when we're having conversations about gender-based violence and about what women go through in the world that we show up in those conversations authentically and that we are not afraid to tell our truth. So when you ask me to talk about who am I and why does this matter to me, it's
Right.
because I'm a survivor of violence myself. And I grew up in a culture and in a family where violence was normalized. So I have experienced it. I've watched loved ones experience it. And I've also really struggled as an adult trying to break the cycle of violence that I grew up in. And so this is very personal to me, just like all the work that I do in equality is very personal, because there's so much in my own experience, as there is in everybody who's watching, that makes this very real. This isn't a theory, it isn't a topic, it's my lived experience. And once you've experienced violence, it changes you.
Right. Very true. Very true. Wow, I get now why you are so passionate about standing up for all of this. And having interacted with you and having followed you, I've followed you on social media, and you are a huge advocate for gender-based violence. Please educate us on different terms like gender-based violence. What is gender-based violence? What is abuse? What is the difference between the two, if there is any difference? Or, sometimes we think we know, but there are these nuances that we don't know, and we need to get clear on. We have to be clear when it comes to awareness, so that then we know what we know and we choose what we can do about it.
Right. Very, very true. There's two things that are always true in this work. One is understanding concepts and what they mean, like really understanding them so we can use them masterfully. But two is also understanding the language and being able to use the language appropriately. And I'll give you an example. Even when we talk about gender equality, most of the people in the world that talk about gender equality are actually only talking about women and issues affecting women, when in
Right.
fact the term gender equality is much more inclusive. It talks about women, men, LGBTQI. It talks about marginalized groups who experience exclusion and marginalization, all associated with not only their sex in terms of physical identity, their gender identity, and also their sexual orientation. So there's so much more to gender equality than what most people actually refer to or understand in how they do this work, right? So in the same way, when we're talking about gender-based violence, there are a few things that we need to understand. One is it's not interchangeable with violence against women. Violence against
Right.
women specifically talks about the violence that women experience as women, even women who self-identify as women. So they may have been born as male and they may now identify as a woman. And so what are the experiences that they experience because they are specifically women in the world? How are they treated differently because of the fact that they're women? That's one element of gender-based violence. But gender-based violence is a more encompassing term that reflects on how different groups and different genders are impacted by violence, and that takes many different forms, which I'll talk about next. But it's all stemming from the fact that they have a certain identity from a gender perspective. So,
Right.
when we talk about how women and men, I mean, that's another thing, right? The idea that women are the only people that experience violence is very misleading. We know that a lot of men experience violence. They experience violence from other men as a form of, exercising power. For example, when you're in jail, a lot of men experience violence as one way of being dominated. Men also experience violence in war, where that's another form of domination when they're in war. And similarly, when we look at which groups are impacted, they have different impacts. So LGBTQI, for example, anyone who's part of the LGBTQI community is going to experience violence, and that violence takes many different forms. But and it's not about comparing and saying your experience of violence is worse or better than mine, but it's recognizing that women are not the only group of people who experience violence, and that it takes many different forms and it happens in many different spaces depending on who you are. And when we have these conversations, we need to be aware of that, because if we're not, then how can a little boy who's experiencing sexual violence at school come and talk to you about it when all he's ever heard is that women are the only ones who experience sexual violence, right? So we
Right.
have to open the conversation so that people can see themselves in that conversation and therefore speak about it when it's happening to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very true. I agree that there are other genders that are exposed to violence. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so tell us the difference between violence and abuse.
Yes, so those terms are used interchangeably, right? We talk about, you know, people experiencing violence, people experiencing abuse, what's the difference, etc. Now, when you do a bit of research, what you'll find is that in many cases we're using the terms interchangeably. What is true is that anytime you have violence, you have abuse. So abuse is part of how violence is experienced. However, there are many forms of abuse, and violence is the extreme, right? So what they both have in common is the fact that somebody is inflicting pain and harm on you, and it's most often done intentionally. So
Right.
that's the other thing about violence and abuse, is that the person who's impacting you often knows that they're doing it, and it's a form of control. So it has to do with power. Very often it's a way in which somebody will exercise the power of you is through abuse and violence. And so part of the work is to help them see it if they don't see what they're doing as violence. Like, I know people in my family who would, exercise violence and exercise abuse, but not seeing as being harmful, because they were taught as they grew up that this is just discipline. It's not harmful if I'm slapping my
Right.
kid to teach them
Right.
discipline. So part of it is the education around different ways of disciplining people and children, and helping them understand how this is a harmful way, but also recognizing that in most cases, when this is an ongoing practice as part of a relationship in a household, or in a marriage, or where two people are living together, even with children and parents, in terms
Right.
of the parents being elderly and experiencing abuse, like, there's often power dynamics at play,
Right.
and we need to back and understand that. The other thing that I want to say is that when it comes to violence, there's three types of violence, and we really need to take the time to understand how they manifest in our life. So the first type of violence is self-inflicted violence. Like, when I was in university, because of all the trauma I had experienced growing up, and in my life, even after I left home, that trauma caused me to disconnect with my sense of self-worth and with myself. And so I did a lot of self-harm. I inflicted a lot of violence and abuse on myself. And that is not something that somebody else can heal or solve. That is work you need to do on yourself. The other type of violence that we experience is the interpersonal violence, where somebody else is committing the violence against you. And sometimes it's a symbiotic relationship where you're also, reproducing violence in your own ways towards the other person. But that interpersonal element is the second one. And the third one, which we don't often talk about, is community-based violence. So like the violence that happens from a cultural perspective, or, like
Right.
in your story, you're living in an extended household and people watched what was happening in your life and they didn't intervene. In fact, they may have even reinforced the abuse and told you to take it because that's what a good wife does. So that communal reinforcement of violence is a third element, and it's very much a part of why things don't change. And then the other piece to this work is understanding the forms that abuse and violence takes. So it's not just the words that I use. In fact, some say there's 5 types of abuse, some say there's 10 types of abuse, but there's emotional, psychological, violence, sexual, physical, physical, monetary, and I can go on and on and on about the different ways in which people experience and inflict abuse and violence on each other, right? So it doesn't just take one form, and it's not all about being hit. In fact, you often experience violence over many years before it ever comes to the point where the person actually physically hurts you, right? So that's another thing for us to be aware of. By the time you're experiencing the physical violence, you've been conditioned to accept that violence, and it has escalated over time because your
Right.
mindset has been kind of shaped to just take it, to take the abuse. And so it just continues to get out of hand if we don't stop it.
Right. 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 We have Tara here. Hi, Tara. And I think she made a comment in the disability community. Violence is often perpetuating and experienced because people with power over don't recognize or respect the existence the victims have a sexuality at all.
Beautiful. Yes, absolutely true. Tara is a great friend of mine. We went to university
Right.
together. Love you, Tara. And that's a very important point for us to make, right? So anyone in the disability community will tell you that they have experienced violence that comes in many forms. It comes because of their sexual identity, their gender, their disability, magnifies how people see them as being powerless or having no voice or having no opinion. And so the underlying theme here is this idea of who has more value, whose rights have a higher weight than other people's, whose opinions and experiences don't matter in a particular situation. And when you're disabled, when you're a person of color, when you're indigenous in this country, when you're a
Right.
refugee, anytime you fit any of those kind of intersectional identities, people see you as being less than. And that's why I always say that conscious equality is about helping us understand not only our own humanity, but
Right.
connecting to other people's humanity so that we honor who they are
Right.
fully as they are, whether they're in a wheelchair, whether they can speak or not, whether they are a housewife or not. We honor them and we respect them and we don't exploit them and take advantage of them the way we are now, right?
Right. Right. Absolutely. Wow. Well, there's so much to talk about this. Today, of all days, is this December 6th is the day of National Day of Remembrance. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so National Day of Remembrance, in Canada on December 6th in 1989, a man walked into the Polytechnic Montreal and shot 14 young women. And he shot them because he was angry with women. Because women at that time were being very vocal and were exercising their rights and were talking about things like no means no. And this person in particular had had enough. So, he felt that he had the right to go into a public building and just shoot people down because of their gender identity, right? Because they were, in fact, it wasn't even that. It was a group of people who was threatening his sense of power because they suddenly had a voice and he didn't like it. And so, people talk about anti feminism and male misogyny, and those are great words. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is one person saying, I don't like you having more power. It doesn't sit well with me because it makes me feel like you're taking something away from me. And so when we look at what's happening in the world around gender-based violence from the perspective of power, a lot of men are brought up, and women too, we internalize this too, the idea that power is zero sum, which means if I have it, you can't have it. And if you start getting more power, it means I'm losing it. And so that was a really powerful and deeply sad example of how somebody was driven to such a terrible act of violence because he felt a loss of his power. And in that sense, there's a deep connection between women's rights and women exercising those rights and men's sense of self and this whole thing about homogeneity around masculinity, right? So manhood has been so deeply tied and socialized into your ability to exercise power. And when you invite a woman out for a date and she says no to you, her ability to say no is internalized as you have reduced my manhood. And so we
Mm,
experience backlash from men who are deeply socialized to have their sense of self connected to our rights. And so, as long as we continue to exercise our rights, that group of men will continue to feel threatened by us and we'll experience backlash. And people need to understand that. Like I always talk about how gender relations, gender norms in society are like a spider web. So if I'm here, teaching a girl how to read and write in a context where girls are not allowed to read and write, this person over here who's being taught that girls are not allowed to read and write is going to get angry because we're changing the rules and we're
right.
changing them without his permission and we're changing them in a way that impacts him. And so what happens is we try and do good, and in doing good by teaching her how to read and write, we actually expose her to backlash and to more violence. And that's why when I talk about conscious equality, I always talk about how good intentions are not enough because often around the world we're trying to solve big problems like gender-based violence because we
Right.
have good intentions, but we don't do it with an understanding of power dynamics in society and in the family and in communities. And as a result of all the good work we're doing, we actually put women in harm's way and we set them up for, being burned, having acid thrown on them, having honor killings. All of this is not disconnected from our work in women's rights and our efforts to actually raise their ability to have a voice. But if we do it to the exclusion of men, this is what happens.
Right. So it's not a daring game, and it's not So this whole idea of conscious equality is uh, is the idea that will support the elimination of gender-based violence, right? And the idea is not to divide and divide the genders and segregate them, but the idea is to bring them together so that they have a better understanding of each other's dynamics and have respect, mutual respect, and mutual care and empathy for each other. It's not, equality doesn't mean that, like all of them have to have the same kind of bodies, all of them have to have the same kind of appearances. It means acknowledging that we are different.
Yeah, acknowledging that we're different, valuing our differences, and giving people the opportunity to be able to be agents of their own lives, right? But here's the
Right.
thing, and I learned this, even with the work I did in Yellowknife, right? So in Yellowknife, they have the highest rates of violence against women in Canada is in the Indigenous communities,
Right.
and it's been an ongoing issue. And so the Status of Women office asked me to kind of think about what have we been doing in the past, how have we been spending our money, and why isn't it working? And I asked them, what are examples of things you've always done? And they said, well, around this time with these dates, like the National Remembrance Day, we walk around and we have rallies, and women say to men, you shouldn't be hitting us, and we have rights, and you should treat us better. And but what I learned from my own personal life story was men know that. Men know that they shouldn't be hitting their wives. In fact, if you ask the men that hit their wives, they'll tell you, I actually love my wife. So why do you do what you do? But in the context of that community, we have to understand that those men are so deeply traumatized because they went to residential schools, they were raped, they were sexually abused, they were torn away from their communities and families, they have no community identity, and then they were thrown back out into a Canada that said, oh, we're so sorry that happened to you, now let's move on. So they were not given the opportunity to deal with their own trauma, to heal
Right.
their own wounds, to understand what it means to be a man who has gone through all of that. And so where are they supposed to take that anger out? Where are they supposed to express that pain? It comes out on the people who are closest to them. It comes out on their wives and their children. And they even, remember I talked about how violence is also inflicting. Well, they also have highest rates of alcoholism and drug abuse. Why? Because they're trying to numb the pain of what they went through. So if we want violence against women to stop, we need to heal the men.
The men.
We need their trauma. And I'm not saying it's one or the other, but I'm saying they're deeply connected. And that part of the work to support women is to also support our men. It's not to excuse what they've done. It's not to give them a green card to do what they're doing, but it's to say that we recognize that my equality is tied to your equality. My freedom is tied to your freedom. My healing is tied to your healing. And that's why I love the way you talked about it. It's about dignity. It's about coming together and not separating us.
Right. Right. Wow, that was so beautifully said. I'm getting goosebumps. Um, you're wearing orange today, and so am I. What is this Orange the World movement, and what is this 16 days of activism that the United Nations has put together?
Yeah, so the 16 Days of Activism actually started in 1991, and it was with the Women's Global Institute. And it was an opportunity or a call to action for us to globally strategize around ending violence against women. So it's been an ongoing campaign since 1991. But this year, the United Nations has asked all of us to wear orange because it signifies hope, it signifies solidarity, it signifies taking action and recognizing that this is an issue that we care about and that we're serious about taking action. And it's even more important now than ever before because of the impact of COVID and how it has really changed what women are experiencing out there in the world and families in particular, right? So, that's another thing that we have to recognize, that violence against women has always been an issue. And in fact, gender-based violence has been an issue. But when we have any kind of issues happening around us in society, like people losing their jobs, like schools closing, like climate change and food insecurity in countries like Sudan and Ethiopia, where they really depend on the harvest. When any of those things are happening, they actually impact the family unit, and they impact the provider of income, and they impact the provider of care, right? So what we're seeing because of COVID right now, and this year in particular, the UN has really asked us to pay attention to this, is even in a country like Canada, even in Canada, and in fact, even in the United States, COVID has impacted women disproportionately. And one of the ways in which that has shown up is higher rates of violence. Why? Because their husbands have lost jobs, they're staying home, they're frustrated, they're angry, they're drinking, they're taking it out on their families. There's more fighting in the household. Even in our household, the first couple of months, the tension was high, the screaming matches were high, right? And I had to tell myself, hold on a second, what's going on here? This is because of the pressure we're both feeling to manage the new situation. On top of that, you've got women, we talk about the triple burden of women. So what does that mean? That means they get up very early, they cook all the meals, they clean all the dishes, they get the kids up and ready, they get them to school, they come back, they work their own job, they do the laundry, they do the cleaning. Thank God in my house, that's not the way it works. My husband does way more than I do around the house. But the point is, we carry the burden of taking care of everybody, of cleaning, cooking, doing all of this, and being a provider. And
Right.
because of COVID, when you have to choose who's going to stay home, who's going to give up their job because the kids are at home, often the person who gives the job up is the person who's making less money. And nine times out of 10, the person who's making less money in the household or who has a part-time job instead of a full-time job is a woman. So she's giving up the income to take care of the kids who are home, to take care of the people who are sick, to take care of everything that's happening in a very difficult situation where they have less money. They're not sure about their future. Everybody's insecure. And all of this has led to higher rates of violence against women. And here's the thing we're not talking about enough: the higher rates of violence against children. Because
Right.
has the least power in the house? It's the child. And we unknowingly and sometimes knowingly take our frustrations out on our children. We say things like, I wasn't, why am I sitting here spending 3 hours doing your homework? I wasn't trained to be a teacher. You should get this. How stupid are you? Like, the things we say to our kids, because of the change in dynamics, it's impacting them. And because they're children and because they don't have the same power as us, they internalize it. They just
Right.
keep taking the abuse. And so what happens is you have a domino effect of abuse. So the husband abuses the mother abuses the child has nowhere to go. The number of helpline calls have gone up exponentially, right? The number of police visits to homes have gone up exponentially, particularly in immigrant households, in households of
Right.
people who are that demographic. It's not because we're bad people. It's not because we're people of color. It's because we are closer to the poverty line than others, right? We have fewer resources, fewer networks, fewer supports. And to make it worse, because of COVID, all of the resources were actually redirected in such a way that shelters were closed down because they didn't want to spread COVID. So you're expected to stay at home when home is not safe for you.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And that has really surfaced big time. I mean, the escape was going to work, going to school. That was the escape from the reality of it. And now it's all in everyone's faces that this totally exists. We can't deny it. And so what would you like, what suggestions do you have for people behind closed doors who are going through violence? What could they do to support themselves while being in that situation? I mean, there are some people who will suggest, face it head on, but I've been through verbal abuse. I was too scared to do that, and I felt that the consequences would be worse if I tried to, challenge the person's power. That person wants to feel his power at that point of time. And if I question, if me saying something would be like questioning that power, and that aggravates things. So what's the fine line? Like, should I stand up for myself? Because people say stand up for yourself. So when there is a situation, violent situation happening at home, there's verbal violence happening, should I stand up for myself, or should I wait till he's calm and then have an opportunity for a dialogue? What's the right thing to do?
So, I mean, that is such a powerful question, and I'm going to answer it from the perspective of having lived through it as a child, right?
Right.
So my answer might not sit with people very well because it's not a black and white answer. And that's
Right.
because I just like you did. And so, here's what I reflect on. The first thing is, if when you're experiencing violence, to ask yourself, is this who this person is, and I just turned a blind eye, or are there extenuating situations going on right now that are exacerbating the situation, which allows me to be a little more understanding? I get it. You just lost your job, you're freaking out, and to have conversations about that, and to say, look, I understand that what just happened isn't who you are, but it happened because of the situation, and how else can we deal with it so that you don't hurt me next time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. Is it who they are, or is it an instant because of something that just happened? But the other thing we need to understand is that, like any other form of gender actions or behavior, gender-based violence is often neurologically built in. What I mean by that is that our brains have brain cells, and that every time we repeat a behavior, just like smoking or watching pornography or hitting your wife or being abusive to your child, every time you do it, you're building a pathway in your brain that becomes more and more solid, so that it becomes a shortcut. Every time your wife walks in and she says, you're having another beer, you just go straight to, I'm going to slap her. You don't even think about it, right? So we, as
Right.
people who are both experiencing the violence and those who know that they're doing things that are not right, they need to understand that you can't always change behavior with a conversation. Why? Because it's actually hardwired into your brain. You've done it so many times that it is now a part of your biology. It's a part of your body. And that's why it's not enough to just sit down and have these conversations. You have to actually commit to a long-term process where you go to a counselor, you talk about what you've gone through, you talk about your patterns, talk about your history, and you talk about different ways of coping when you're triggered by stress, when you're triggered by anger, when you're triggered by so like the abuser has to be so deeply committed to the journey that they're willing to understand that the only way I'm going to break this, just like with smoking or alcoholism, is a journey that I need to go on with real professional help, right? A lot of people don't understand that. So they think, I'm just going to talk to him and tomorrow he'll be different. He's not going to be different. And by the way, it's not just him. She's not going to be different either, So
Right.
that's another piece that we need to understand. Now, one thing that really, I think, gave me hope, which it was hope that I did not have, by the way, because growing up, there were many times when I was literally sitting on the stairs praying to God, somebody come and stop this. I'm sure people walking by can hear what's happening in my house, but nobody would ever stop, knock on the door, and come in. Why? Because we have taught people that what happens inside a marriage, what happens inside a home is their business. It's private. And one of the things that I want to change, because it's so fundamental to these issues, is the idea that my neighbor being abused is their business. It's not their business. It's my business too. And if we don't change that dynamic, so much happens under our noses, in our own house, next to us, in the school that we live in. You can see signs that somebody's being affected. You can see the black eye under the makeup. You can see the child that was always bubbly, not talking, not looking up at you in the eyes. You know something's happening and you turn the other way when we shouldn't, right? So, as I said, when I was a kid, I would pray and say, somebody come, somebody come. Nobody ever came. Why? Because it was their business. And so I made a decision at a very young age that I was not going to stand by and allow this to happen. Not to anybody that I loved, and God help me, not to myself, right?
Right.
So it's a choice I made at a young age, which is why I do what I do, because I'm never going to sit by and allow bad things to happen to people if I can help it.
Right.
And so if you are somebody who knows that something is happening, who can see something is going wrong, you know, India had this amazing campaign to address violence against women, and all it was about was one strategy: interrupt the violence.
Right.
Interrupt the violence is the number one biggest thing you can do to help anybody in that situation. How do you do that? You ring the doorbell and you say, "Hi, oh, I'm sorry to bother you. Could I have a cup of milk?" You ring the doorbell and you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, my phone's not working. Can I use your phone?" You ring the doorbell and say, "Hey, I was just coming by to see if you want to go for a walk with me." So that interruption alone stops the violence from escalating and can save a person's life. And if you are the kind of person who can read a situation and say it's safe enough to do it, I would even ring the doorbell and say, "I think we need to talk about what's going on." Right? So
Right.
don't ever, I'm not saying put yourself in harm's way. Don't. If you don't feel safe doing it, call the police, have the police come and check the situation. But the one thing I would say is do not turn a blind eye when you know something is happening, because you could make the difference between a person being alive today and a person having no mother tomorrow. And I'm saying
Right.
that seriously because so many people have lost their lives to violence. And, you know, we say get up and leave. I know that my mother didn't leave. She didn't leave from one marriage until she had her life threatened. And it
Right.
took, you know what it took her to leave? It took an entire community, it took an entire family telling her, "We have your back. We will catch you if you fall. We will make sure you're okay. You're doing the right thing. Leave." Right? But at the
Right.
same time, leaving when you have children, leaving when you're depending on that person for the income, leaving when you have nowhere permanent to go is it feels irresponsible to a mother.
Right.
It like you're putting your own child in harm's way and you're not going to leave your child, so you stay and you take it because you want to keep your child in you know, you don't want to expose your child to a world of chaos that comes after you leave. So
Right.
for those who are on the outside, it's super important that we don't judge, that we don't think we know what the person needs to do, because you're not in their shoes. You don't understand what choices they have to make and what's keeping them from going or coming.
Right.
But the other thing, I've had people ask me this, like, what do I do? I have a friend, she comes to me every day, all the time. This person's really abusing her. How do I help? And so, you know, as we've heard in other campaigns recently,
Yes.
have a conversation about having a plan. Like, what sign are you going to show me when you call me or we're on a video call? Like, how are you going to let me know that, okay, I want out now? Call the police or come and get me. Like, what's the sign? Because often when you're in that heated moment, you cannot pick the phone up to make a sign. You cannot say with your words, "I'm in trouble. He's about to kill me," right? So have a plan with that person and figure out with that person, how are they going to let you know, and what do they want you to do when they give you that sign.
Right. So it has to be reaching out for help and putting a structure in place in case you need that help. It's like a first, you know, how we have a first aid kit, or you know, how we have 911, or you know, or a fire escape route in you know, planned out, and you know what to do if something like this happens. So it's the same thing, creating a plan that if there's an emergency like this somebody should know what your signs are.
Yes.
Right, right. And wow, this is such an informative session. Thank you so much. And this is great. I remember because when I was in India too, you know, when there used to be arguments or fights within the family, sometimes the elders would intervene and stop it, that you know. And nobody said mind your own business, it's none of your business, or it's my business or your business or anything, but the elders intervened. That was a great blessing, you know. That's something that is, I feel like, missing here, because people are scared to intervene, that you'll be told off, mind your own business, and you know, it's uncomfortable, or you don't want to be told off like that. Yes. Now what about what else could we do other than intervening? What tips would you give someone who is stuck in an abusive relationship? Let's say, some self-care tips, or what are some resources available?
Yeah, so there's a lot you can do. I think the first thing is being honest with yourself.
Mm.
Are you in an abusive relationship? And
Right,
remember that abuse isn't just being beaten until you can't walk, right? Like abuse
right,
takes many forms. So are you in a relationship where you're experiencing verbal abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse? If you are, be honest about it. And secondly, take responsibility for your well being. And what I
right,
mean by that is there are no shortage of resources in this country, no shortage of places you can call to get information. So, and they're free for those who need them to be free. So,
right,
if you're somebody who has like an employee assistance plan at work, use
right,
it. Call somebody and talk to them and talk through what you're going through. If you don't have access to that, find a community resource that's free and use it to talk through what you're dealing with
right,
and to ask strategies. How do I de escalate? How do I create a plan? What are my options if something happens? If I need to make a police report, what do I need to know about that? How do I make sure that my kids are protected? Like all of those things. Plan all of that out. Like do the work to know more about what is available to you and what steps you can take. And I tell you, information is really empowering and it also helps you feel more confident.
right, right,
And the other thing is look at what your future would look like if you weren't experiencing this. Because a lot of people never, they're so committed to what they have built that they
right,
never even look at what would my life look like if this person wasn't in it.
right,
What would be available to me? And to really kind of almost daydream about what would be available if you did the work to step out of this relationship. But here's the thing, most of us are in relationships with people that we truly care about, and we all have issues, we all have shortcomings. And if you're with a partner who you feel you can have an honest conversation with, have the conversation with them and tell them, I'm committed to being in this relationship with you, but I need us to do the work to change the cycle here. you know like, let's
right,
have that conversation, let's go to counseling, let's go figure out what you went through that's leading to this, and
right,
help your partner deal with what they're dealing with, because even if you leave, that person is still going to have those issues
right,
you know
right, right. A lot of the women who are in abusive relationships are very ashamed to talk about it, or sometimes they're scared to talk about it. I mean, for example, I was scared to talk about it because on one hand I see verbal abuse happening, on the other hand I'm still thinking, okay, he's my husband, he is not in his senses, and he doesn't know what he's doing. But if I take drastic action and if I tell an authority, maybe he'll be arrested, maybe the cops will take him away. And just not wanting to do that to him, let me put up with that and stay in that. There are women who have those things going on in their lives. What advice would you have for them?
well, let me ask you the question, like, what was it that broke the camel's back? Like, what was it that made you say, okay, I need to take action now?
Well, I reached rock bottom when I had cancer. That's when my most the reason why I stayed in the relationship was fear. The fear, many different fears. One was that I won't be able to handle the financial burden of raising my kids all by myself, all the work that goes as a single parent. I will take away a dad from them. Like it might impact kids, and when they are in their teens and they come from a broken family, they will have their own psychological issues, that I don't have a dad, and all of that would keep me in that place. Those were the issues by and I was afraid of him, how he would get angry and lash back at me and make it worse for me, because I was the one who took action and said, I want a divorce. But when I had cancer, I thought I was going to die. So what could be a bigger fear? Like, if I'm dying, then this meant this fear was suddenly small. And I thought, let me take a risk, that what if I live, then I could have a different life. So I thought maybe I'm going to die anyways. I might as well fix things for my kids before I leave this world, you know. Then it became about my kids.
Yes.
So,
Isn't it isn't it true? I think anyone who's ever experienced an abusive relationship will tell you that most of their decisions are driven by their children. Like
right,
to do right by their children. And so for you, it was like, if I'm going to leave them behind, let me do the very best I can for them before I have to go, right? And
right,
that gave you courage, that gave you the courage to make choices and decisions that you wouldn't have made otherwise.
right,
So so here's the thing, like I'm a trained life coach as well, and
right,
I mean, I don't think there's any surprise that that is an area that I decided to give myself some skills in, because so many disempowered women and men and other individuals, uh, a lot of them, what they're struggling with and the life that they end up living has to do with their mindset.
right,
You know, whether you pack a bag and walk out the door, or whether you sit there and accept abuse, or whether you say it was my fault, I triggered this, all of this is in here, all of it.
right,
The world
right,
we create, the excuses we make, what we think is possible or not possible, whether or not there's a future after this marriage, it's all up here. And so
right,
the amount of work, and that's where Landmark was so amazing for you and
right.
I, that
Yes,
it took the same facts of our lives, and it helped us distinguish what is our story, what have we made it mean, and how is that impacting the choices and the actions that we take. And
right,
so I was, if you are going through this and you're not ready to call the cops, you're not ready to walk out the door, at least reach out to somebody who's not just going to hold your hand and say, I understand, it's so sad you're going through this. Reach out to a trained professional who can help you work through your mindset, who can help
right,
you distinguish the fact from the story that you're making and how it's disempowering you and locking you into that situation. Because taking bold action requires that you are actually a different kind of person. The person that you're being right now in that violent relationship is going to stay in that violent relationship until you change who you are.
right.
Do you resonate with that?
Sorry?
Does that resonate with you and the
Yes,
journey you've had?
absolutely, absolutely. Your voice is breaking. So, yes, absolutely. It resonates with me. And
That, that's what it took for us to break the cycles.
right, right. And
Working on us.
do you still hear an echo? Every time I go to talk, there's an echo. Do you hear an
No,
echo? No. Okay, that's
no.
why I'm pausing and talking, because I'm allowing the echo to repeat me. Um, my next question is that sometimes, um, as a layperson, I don't know the fine lines between, especially when it comes to verbal abuse. I don't know the fine lines. Like for me, swear words are verbal abuse. Okay, but there could be things like I was reading the other day, and I was surprised because I'm guilty of doing this. I've done this to my kids before, um, where I read this, that sometimes a mom will say, "You're not listening to me. Wait, let your dad come. I'm going to let your dad know that you did this." I did not know that is abuse. And I'm trying to understand why that is abuse.
So, what insights did you get from unpacking that? Why was it abuse?
So I felt that I am not having a conversation with my child and saying why I feel that she is doing something that is not appropriate, or why I feel the way I feel about what she's doing. And instead of that, I feel like it comes through as a threat. I'm not giving her any justification, but I'm just saying, do it my way, and it's a threat. If you don't listen, then I'm going to let your dad know. So I'm instilling fear, and I am causing this distance between both genders in a way. Like now I'm being present to all of that. That I'm being real. Okay, now I'm thinking, I don't know what right now in this moment, that because he's a man and my daughter is a girl, so I'm teaching her how to be afraid of authority that's male. and I have no power over her. I am not able to have control over her, so I'm saying, okay, let your dad come. So I'm kind of vesting my power in him too, that I don't have any power and he has more power by virtue of being the man of the house. Is that why?
So number one, my friend, I have done it too. We've all done it. Our mothers
Right,
have done it, right?
right,
We learn from our parents, and so I think that's something very common that many
right,
parents are doing.
right,
The other thing, you hit it on the head. It's about power. She has, and I have the same dynamics with my kids. So I've raised them slightly differently from my husband, so they don't fear me, right? So to them,
right.
it's like, it's just mom. She said, come down. I'll come down 10 minutes later. It's just
Yes,
mom.
yes,
On one hand, we say, well, she doesn't respect you. But on the other hand, it's actually because she feels safe that she can put her needs before yours,
right,
right?
right,
So, but people read it as disrespect, and then they say, I'm not being respected. You're not showing me that I'm in charge. So I'm going to now forcefully find ways to get your attention and get you to do what I want. So the
right,
first thing is we raise our voices and we tell them, I told you 3 times now, come downstairs. If that doesn't work, then we say, okay, what's the next thing I can do to have power over? Oh, well, I'm going to like threaten you by telling your dad. Now you're scared. Now you come. So it's about, how do I get what I want, and how do I use different ways of exerting power over you to get what I want. But you're right. While that might work in the instance,
right,
what you're doing is conditioning her with a number of things. One is, my needs are not as important as my mother's. I need to do what she wants, whether or not I'm ready for it.
right,
Right? You're teaching her that her needs are not important, that you're not interested in listening to her, that you don't have any power, that you're
right,
going to go to the man, that you're willing, here's somebody who trusts you and you're willing to threaten her
right,
with somebody else's power. So what you're doing is you're disrupting and dissolving so many levels of relationships in her life,
right,
including teaching her, as a mother, I don't have the skills to deal with children, and so I need to lean on my husband or somebody else.
right,
And so I'll give you a different example. As children become teenagers, they're exploring their bodies. They want to know about sexuality. They may go on Google and search a few things up that are not appropriate. They may
right,
send out photos or texts that you don't want them to.
right.
How would you, as a parent, and I'm not asking you in particular, but I want us to think about it, like, because it's such a high stakes thing, right? This whole thing about the body and sexuality,
It's
and
very
for girls
funny
in
that
particular.
you brought this up because I have two teenagers at home now, and this is something that we are having conversations about. What's okay with them is sometimes, I feel like it's a bit much. It's a bit much. So, and I'm coming from a place of not body shaming or, making her feel embarrassed about herself. But what I'm concerned about is the kind of attention she will attract. And it might lead to some kind of harm being done to her because she's exploring and she's expressing herself through her body. And so, as much as she is beautiful to me and she's my child, but I'm worried and I want to hide and protect my child away from, evil eyes and people who might inflict harm on her. How do I communicate that to my child? And
Yeah,
and
very delicate situation, and it wasn't long ago since you and I were teenage girls and wanting that attention, and pushing boundaries about what's appropriate or not appropriate, right? And God knows
right,
what we got away with that our parents never saw. But
yes,
so what I would say is, a lot of parents, especially when it comes to conversations about sexuality, because it's so tied to abuse and rape and, losing your virginity and honor of the family and are
right,
you a virgin or not? Like, there's so much tied into the physical body and sexuality that we almost forget the person that's at the center of all of it, right? And so
right,
it's so easy to say, what's wrong with you? You should never do this. Don't you have any self-respect? Like, you're making the person wrong when it's not the person that should be punished, it's helping them guide the world context, which is not changing, by the way, right? So that context is what it is. Men are always going to seek the attention of 15-year-old girls. You know, they're always, if she's on Instagram, she's always going to get messages from weirdos. Am I having conversations that helps her deal with, like, if mommy gets the messages, the kid's going to get them too, right? But am I having conversations where we're talking about, this is the world you live in. If you send this kind of photo out, what kind of attention do you think you're going to get? How would you deal with a weirdo writing to you? Like, how are you going to protect yourself? Like, you know, maybe this photo is great. Take this photo, it's beautiful, but maybe not put it online. Like, maybe this is just for your eyes, you know?
Right.
So, like, are we having those conversations, or are we making the kid feel like the kid is dirty and the kid is wrong and the kid shouldn't do this? And
Right.
right?
Right. So
Here's the
let's
thing.
say if we
Yeah.
are having that conversation, and your kid feels you're being old fashioned and overprotective. Right?
You know what? That's not me, because I've already told my kids I'm going to be at the dance club dancing with them, at the
Right.
bar watching drinks.
Right.
She
Right.
play the weird songs. I'll be like, hey, that's my daughter over there. You can come over here. Leave her alone. But
Right.
yeah, like, look, there's no magic pill. But here's the thing: we spend a lifetime before they reach that point of crisis in their life. We have a lifetime training them on whether or not they can come to us, whether or not they can trust us, whether or not we
Right.
have, long before anything ever happens. And
Right.
so it's like, my 7-year-old, what am I teaching her about her relationship with me now, before she gets
Right.
to that place? So that when that place comes, even if we disagree, there's a whole history of trusting me, where even if we don't agree on the same thing, she understands where I'm coming from and why I'm concerned, and we have some agreement about steps that we will take together. So, like, I don't expect my 14-year-old to always listen to me and always agree with every. In fact, she doesn't. She's very much like me. She's very independent, doesn't want to be parented. But you know, we can at least have conversations where we agree. And I'll give you an example of what happened with me. When I was 15, I wanted to go out partying in Kenya. All the
Right.
kids at my school were out every Saturday, and they were out at a place called Carnivore, and they were out all night. And my mom would say, I don't like you going out at night. You know, I'm worried that you'll get hit by a car. I'm worried about the thieves on the road. I'm worried about some guy grabbing you. And those are all real concerns. But my whole world was, everybody else is going, and you're the only stick in the mud who won't let me go. You're ruining my life, right? But
Yes.
but I said, I can't spend my whole life locked up in this house, Mom. And so here's the agreement that we reached. The agreement that we reached was, I can go out earlier than most people go out. So at like 6 with my friends, when the light was still out, we go
Yes.
have dinner somewhere. I spend the entire night at the club, and I drive home when the sun is out the next morning. So I actually stayed out longer than anybody I knew. But what I did by agreeing to that was, I wasn't on the road at night. I wasn't traveling when there was high risk. And my mother
Right.
had the peace of mind that I was managing my safety,
Right.
right?
Right.
So she got what
That's
she wanted,
all.
and I got what I wanted.
Right. Right. The art of negotiating. Right, right. I have a question for you, for my friends from India. It is a thing in India where, recently there's been a lot of rape cases. India has been sometimes termed as the rape capital of the world, and Delhi specifically. And there's always been this accusation that women are raped because of the way they dress up, or because of the way they conduct themselves, because of the way they are the ones responsible. They lure the men into doing this. They tempt the men into raping them. What is your point of view about it?
Well, I think if you ask any woman, they'll tell you they were not looking for it, they did not want it, and they probably said no many times, right?
Right.
I'll tell you that I heard the same thing about my own rape. It was like everything was my fault. I was 13, and how could a 13-year-old want everything that happened to her? But no, the whole entire community, the family, everybody, it was all like, this is your fault, you know?
Mm.
And a lot for a child, it's a lot for a grown woman to have to bear the burden of being blamed for what's happened to her, when we all know, if we look at it objectively, that she wasn't asking for it, she didn't want it, she was simply going from work to home, or from home to the market, or getting on a bus, like the woman that was raped and killed on the bus, right?
Right.
It's a very interesting situation, because it is it's so contradictory. On the one hand, we have female goddesses, and we
Right.
talk about how we're so, we're deities, and we're like this female power, and we should respect motherhood and femininity. And on the other hand, we have so choked sexual freedom. We have so, made it difficult for both young boys and girls to express themselves sexually, to have relationships outside of marriage, which we all know is all happening. But we've
Right.
created such a toxic culture around it, that
Right.
this is one of the side effects, that men are going to go and get what they want. And let's not forget that it's in a context that is highly patriarchal, where men have been
Right.
raised from the beginning that they can have whatever the hell they want. So if you
Right.
think about it, who are raising those boys? Mothers and
Right.
sisters and grandmothers.
Right.
Raising those little boys from the beginning to
Right.
believe that they're precious and they're powerful and they're more important, and they go to school because they're going to keep our name going for the rest of history. And then we want them to stop. It's like, how can you give them door open, door open, door open, door open, and then say, oh, no, 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 you can't open that door. You can open every other door you want. You can have anything else you want, but not that door,
They'll
right?
go straight for that door.
Right? So like, it's complicated. What I'm saying is, it's complicated, because no
Absolutely.
one policy is going to fix it. No sending a bunch of guys to jail is going to fix it. No
Right.
putting them death penalty is going to fix it. No empowering women is going to fix it. But there's so many things we can say about that situation, because part of the commentary is, we tell the girl, the more this is happening, the more we want to hold you back, the more we want to stop you from going to school, and stop you from wearing Western clothes, and stop you from, we're just going to get you married earlier, because we want to avoid any of that ever happening to you. So the more it happens there, the smaller the woman's world gets, because we're trying to protect her,
Right.
right? The smaller we make women's worlds, the more space men have to do the things that they've been doing and getting away with. So
Right.
I think we're not going to solve that problem in this conversation, but I just want to acknowledge that there are many players, there are many pieces.
Right.
Policy has a role, police have a role, women have a role, their families have a role. But ultimately, here's the thing that just breaks my heart. And I say this because I'm a survivor of it. What breaks my heart is when somebody is in a situation where they're raped, or they're abused, or something bad happens to them, and they don't find the safety that they need at home, and they don't
Right.
find that they need from their community, or from their parents, or from their siblings, or from their friends. What they find is more judgment. To overcome what you've gone through, and to pull yourself back together again in a context where everybody else is blaming you,
Right.
everybody else is shaming you, everybody else is telling you your siblings and your family will no longer have honor when people find out about this, you leave that child no option except to want to kill themselves.
Right.
You don't have any pathway to coming back from it, right?
Right.
And I think things that Landmark helped me do, the people have all kinds of opinions about Landmark, but one of the things that it helped me do was understand that what happened to me was one moment, one day in my entire life. And
Right.
that's all it needed to be. It didn't need to define who I am today. It didn't need to mean I'm a good person or a bad person. It didn't need to mean anything other than that happened on that day, and that's all there is to it. It has no power over me anymore, which is why I can talk about it. Most
Right.
women will not talk about what happened to them, and that's part of the problem, because they're so trapped by the shame, the guilt, the fear,
The
and
stigma.
as long as the stigma, and as long as we buy into that, as long as we accept that that's the world that we live in, we will never be free. Never be free
Right.
from what happened. Never be free to be whoever we want to be anyway.
Right. Right. Well, thank you so much. This is so informative, and this was, we could go on and on and on. I could ask you all the questions. I've got you today. Let's ask all the questions and learn everything about it. But it's lovely listening to you and learning from you. You are really a treasure house of all the information that we need to know and learn to hold ourselves up with dignity as a woman, and to understand, that it is not, protecting the rights of women, or women empowerment, or, ending gender-based violence is not something that women can do in isolation. We live in a community. We don't live, separately, that women are on another planet and the other genders are on another planet. That's not how we live. So we have to collaborate, and it's teamwork, and it's mutual respect and care and love. Unless we put the guns down, because we're so ready to shoot the other gender, unless we put the guns down, we are not going to eliminate any kind of violence. So, having said that, I would like to thank you for coming and sharing all your knowledge and information and your expertise with us. Um, Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I'll see. I'll see all the other people watching and listening. Thank you so much for being there and listening to this episode of uh, and trying to end gender-based violence. I am going to be back again tomorrow with yet another expert who is a psychotherapist, and she's going to talk about narcissistic relationships, and the violence that occurs in a narcissistic relationship. Until then, have a happy Sunday, all of you. Thank you once again, Karen, and bye bye.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with anyone. Thank you for the opportunity to chat about this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.